Ah, here's my heart, Lord. Speak what is true. Beautiful. Thank you, Reverend Grace Telesco, for singing our song. So let's all begin with a unified breath, breathing in. Exhale into our hearts. When you press your hand against your heart, you feel your heartbeat. And we're reminded that we are all joined by these heartbeats, extending love to one another, extending peace to one another, remembering the miraculous mechanism of our hearts. That not only does it keep us alive, but it keeps the world alive through our love. It exists beyond our physical existence. It has the power to transform lives. That's the power of your heart. Imagine that and remember that. Extend your love out into the world. Scientific proof that our hearts can indeed send out vibrations, and how we choose our minds to control those vibrations is all about a decision to love, a decision to speak words of kindness, to take time to understand each other, one another, and even ourselves. So we begin this time together with that remembering of why we are here, to love, serve, and to remember that we are here to be of service, sacred service, simply through the extension of our hearts and the capacity that we have to use our hearts as instruments of peace. So let's take another nice deep breath together and exhale into this moment with gratitude, balance, and in awe of the day and awe of our lives together. So I am aware that last time I tried to play the song for you, it didn't come out very well because I did not have my mic secured. So hopefully today you were able to hear the song a little bit better, maybe even sang along a few lines. The song says, "Here's my heart, speak what is true." And so when we are still and quiet and deeply committed to hearing, we do indeed hear what is true, what is the voice of spirit that's leading us in one direction or another. As we say, tell me what to do, tell me what to say, and to whom, tell me where to go. How can I do better and be better? How can I rise higher, love steadily, forgive readily? And when we get out of our own way, we find the way. We find the way. So if you are following on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, you will note that there seemed to have been a missing podcast. But if you follow on Facebook, on the Miracles with a Twist page, you'll see that I posted a Throwback Thursday video, and that went back to June 17th, 2021. So if you want to hear that, just scroll through the playlist to June 17th, 2021. And then on another page and another channel, which is Miracles with a Twist Conversations, MWAT Conversations, Gotti Lisa, Reverend Lisa Benton, and I have already discussed the content of that June 17th podcast. So at the time it was a live stream. So check it all out and join the conversation. Today, I'm going to cover something that I've never covered before, which is the supplement that was added after A Course in Miracles had been scribed and published. And it is the psychotherapy section, the psychotherapy supplement, which you only have if you have the full combined book, which includes clarification of terms and supplements. And the supplements are psychotherapy and the Song of Prayer, which we've already discussed. So here in the introduction, it says that the psychotherapy supplement was started in 1973. It was completed in 1975. So I'm going to just read some little gems that I highlighted here, and then we'll discuss it further. It says the purpose of psychotherapy very simply is to remove blocks to truth. God has given everyone a teacher whose wisdom can help and far exceed whatever contributions an earthly therapist can provide. Yet there are times and situations in which an earthly patient-therapist relationship becomes the means through which God offers its greater gifts to both the therapist and the patient. We call them clients now. What better purpose would any relationship have than to invite the Holy Spirit to enter? And that's how we create holy relationships. It says psychotherapy is a process that changes our view of the self. Now, I want to point out that, this was the 70s, so languaging changes in time, right? There are things that we can say now differently than we may have said just simply by the way we use words. So when I was a psychotherapist and I had a psychotherapy private practice, it was talk therapy. I had a master's in counseling, and my psychology degree is in psychoanalysis, therapeutic theories, and application. So when I became ordained, I started to introduce spiritual concepts and spiritual direction into my psychotherapy practice. So I call that spiritual psychotherapy. And I do believe that that is what this supplement is referring to, because it's not strictly about the psychotherapeutic process as we once thought about it, which is more of a digging deep into issues, childhood issues or trauma-related issues. In spiritual psychotherapy, we look at those things, but we also look at how we can implement our spiritual practices into our healing. And that's something that we continuously talk about here in Miracles with a Twist, is how we can best serve our spiritual dedications by looking at our life from a body, mind, and spirit perspective, because those are the areas that often we need to heal before we can truly rise as high as we want to rise. Because as long as we're still being affected by our emotional issues, our subconscious controls, our ego, our traumas, as long as that is still at the forefront, then that will be the major driving force in our lives, as opposed to our spiritual dedications. And that's why it's so important to be really, really honest with ourselves, because there's no shame in having emotional concerns that need to be addressed, because if we don't look at them, we can't heal them. So maybe we have defense mechanisms, maybe we have certain areas of reactivity. We look at them honestly, with rigorous honesty, and we work on healing them, as well as maintaining our spiritual dedications. And then we can sort of gauge ourselves. We can see where we're starting to change, where things may have created a certain level of unhealthy or dysfunctional patterns, reactivity. And because we're applying what we're learning from a psychotherapeutic perspective, and we're also integrating our spiritual learning, we start noticing a change. We start noticing that we're not quite as reactive. We understand our reactivity, but we also rise a little bit higher. So we can now maybe apply love to the situation, apply compassion to the situation, to ourselves and to the other, or the others, or the circumstance. And so in making this combined effort of emotional healing with spiritual growth, we start noticing that it's more important to find peace and to be at peace than it is to maintain some old ego-driven ways of arguing, or wanting to be right, or wanting even to be heard sometimes, maybe we don't even have to be heard at some point. We find peace within ourselves. And I was happy to see just recently, I got an email from Spiritual Directors International, and it's a group that I belong to since I was ordained, because I do serve as a spiritual director at times. And I also have a program that I call Spiritual Life Booster Shots, where I apply some of the body, mind, and spirit techniques to a session. And it's not something that anyone has to do on an ongoing basis. I mean, sometimes we just need tune-ups, right? Sort of like with these COVID booster shots, right? We want to see whether or not that's going to help us feel a little bit better and stay stronger longer. So I call it Spiritual Life Booster Shots. Anyway, so Spiritual Directors International just recently introduced a whole forum of trauma-informed therapists who are also ministers, spiritual directors, spiritual leaders, who are learning the importance of trauma-informed therapies integrated into the companionship and the journeying that they are doing with their clients. And I was very pleased to see that, because that's an important evolution of our integration in theories, in application. There was a time when you wouldn't see that. There was a time, there was a time when science and religion and spirituality was all very, very separate. And so people who were practicing spiritual direction weren't necessarily considering psychotherapeutic issues that had to do with trauma, and they were kind of like hands off. But now they're getting trained. They're integrating their education around psychotherapeutic issues with their ministerial duties. And it's a wonderful thing to see that there is an understanding of the human condition and the areas at which we need to apply healing. And that's why I started calling quantum physicists spiritual scientists, because that's what they're doing. They're looking at the quantum field and how we are affected by our thoughts, and how in our relationships, and how we interact with each other, and how they can scientifically show how our brains change, how our hearts change, and how our brains can heal. They can be there's the neuroplasticity. Our brains can heal from traumatized brains to newly neuroned brains. It's just really something that's coming together. And it's like, if you ask an elder yogi, they might say, oh yes, we've always known that. That's always been the science of yoga. But our human minds, our ego-driven, need-to-know minds, are now seeing scientific proof joining with spiritual practices to adhere to concepts that help us heal and grow in body, mind, and spirit, especially in the union of the heart with the mind. And so we see, I mean, that's what yoga means, right? Union. So we're seeing that science is joining spirituality, and in science they're looking at the importance of meditation, of finding peace within. And it doesn't necessarily have to be spiritual driven. It's just that once you do find yourself wanting to go to that inner place of peace, wanting to find peace, wanting to live from peace, it becomes spiritual practice. That's part of the evolution. And there are people who may not ever say that they're spiritual, and yet they are functioning in a way that's very kind and Zen and Buddhist and Course in Miracles-ish and mystic, right? From that way of being, it becomes a way of being. I wrote here also Gabrielle Bernstein. Some of you may know her. She's in her 40s now, but when she was in her 20s, she became very successful as a Oprah supported author of spiritual concepts, and she was a great teacher. And what she said was that in this interview I just heard recently, that when she got into her mid-30s, like everything sort of started to crash and burn, because she realized she had never dealt with some serious trauma issues. And so she had to go back into looking at things from a therapeutic healing perspective, family systems and trauma, all of that. So we don't want to separate these parts of ourselves. And so the course was telling us way back when it got started, the importance of looking at the psychotherapeutic relationship And it says, we already have a teacher. We have a teacher deep within, which we can access through the wisdom practices of meditation and quietness and in this case, the lessons of A Course in Miracles, to really truly practice them as they're requesting us to do. And then we start seeing the shift. But now it's all sort of coming together. Like it's sort of like this wonderful new age of awareness and growth and awakening and all these ahas that we are all having as a brotherhood, a sisterhood, a kinship, mighty companions, recognizing the importance of seeing what it is that has occurred in our lives so we can apply it to doing better and being better as opposed to being bitter. And if we don't look at it, we won't know what's the driving force behind us. And so what we want to do is do the healing so that the driving force gets to be always and in everything our spiritual dedications. So it takes time to get there, and we're all on that path together. And sometimes it's just a matter of finding what's good enough at any given time, because you're never going to find the perfect person, the perfect relationship, the perfect therapist, the perfect spiritual leader, because there is no perfection in our humanness. But we can get to the point where we can be okay with recognizing what is good enough at any given time for us to receive the information, the learning, the healing that we need in that moment, and not to hold anyone up to a high pedestal that they're just going to end up falling down and crashing. We're going to see each other as equals, as holy relationships, potential for the holy relationship. It even says in there that the patient-therapist relationship brings the Holy Spirit into it so that it becomes holy, so we become blessed, so that we become open to the blessings that are of spiritual guidance. So then I ended up looking at my own book. This is from a long time ago. So years ago, I wrote a book called The Bumpy Road to Enlightenment, Thoughts Collected Along the Path. I published this back in 2003, and it's out of publication right now. It's out of print. I do know there's people who have found it on Amazon, but I'm not the seller. I don't know who sells it, but I think it can be found. I might republish at one point, but I just want to read a few things that I wrote in here. So in the beginning of the book, I tell a story about a farmer who's late to get to the market, and he needs to sell his potatoes. This is his main crop is potatoes, and so it's this main source of income. And he's really worried because he didn't take the time to put baskets of potatoes according to size, because there's different prices depending on the size. He's got large potatoes, medium-sized potatoes, little potatoes. So he throws all the potatoes on the back of his truck, and he goes driving through the bumpiest road he can find, because by going through the bumps, the potatoes all start shaking and rattling and bumping into each other. And what happens by virtue of just physics, is it physics? Dynamics? The small potatoes and the large potatoes and the medium-sized potatoes just fall into place. They just sort of naturally separate themselves out. So what you end up with when he gets out is you can get the large potatoes off the top, the medium size off the bottom, and the small potatoes off the very, very bottom. So I refer to this as I end that particular introduction. It says, you too can rise to the top by not fearing the bumpy roads of your good and your not so good. You can focus on where you want to go and the type of person you want to be when you get there, by keeping your heart pure and your mind open. When the road finally smooths, you'll be pleased and you'll be at peace. Let us pray that all people everywhere can live in peace, and somehow we can all be instruments of that peace. And then I go on to say, it says, in this book, I talk about the journey that comes before results are achieved, about the bumpy roads we travel while on the spiritual path. Power lies within our endurance, our persistence, our growing through the bumps and the bruises. In them, we find the seeds of our empowered spirits. Regardless of how shaky the ground might feel beneath our feet, at some point we stop resisting, we wake up, and we realize that all along we were walking on sacred ground. So everything, everywhere we go, everything we do, regardless if it's an unhealed aspect of ourselves, it is holy ground. It is holy grist for the holy mill, for the holy relationships, for the holy undoing of our ego-driven fears, for the holy awakening of what we can truly see when we see with eyes of love, when we put ourselves in that beam of light that allows us to be an instrument of peace. And so I join you on this path of awakening. I encourage you to take whatever paths you need to do to heal and to grow on an emotional level and on a physical level, because we're all in this together, and we're going to continue throughout the year looking at how it is that we need to be rigorously honest with ourselves so that everything we do becomes holy. Everything is holy now. Isn't that a song? Everything is holy now. And so God bless you. Enjoy this very sacred journey.